All right, so as I said, today the topic is personal finance essentials. And the way I'm going to approach this is by talking about what I think are the top 10 money mistakes that students make just out of college. And so a lot of students either don't have much income or they just haven't had time to build financial habits or even just research some basic kind of financial terms. So I'll go through what I think are the top 10, really going to focus on the top 3, and then the last 7 are just kind of a list. But I'm happy to go a little deeper on any of them if there's any questions or comments. All right, so mistake number 1 is ignoring student loan repayment. So the key here is just to do your research and find the best repayment plan for your situation. But there's some key vocab to learn. And I think that because there's a bit of vocab here, some students just put it off, right? And you think, okay, I'll have a higher paying job later, I'll deal with it later. But at the very least, these are just some terms you can look up and then find out which of them applies to your loan. So for example, there's private versus federal loans. And with federal loans, some of them are subsidized versus unsubsidized, meaning during college, if it's subsidized, interest is not accruing until later when you have to start paying back. With unsubsidized, interest on them is already accruing. Some loans have fixed versus variable interest rates. Fixed meaning it'll stay the same throughout the life of the loan. Variable meaning that after a set number of years, that interest rate could adjust, and it could adjust to market conditions, which if interest rates have gone up a lot, could make your loan a lot more expensive or harder to pay off. What kind of repayment plan are you on? Is it a standard, multi-year fixed rate, or is it graduated where it starts really low, but then it slowly increases by a few percent, assuming that when you set up a loan like that, the assumption is that maybe you're making more as you get further into your career. It could be income driven. So if you make more than your expected repayment rate increases, or if you have more kids, your family grows, sometimes it'll adjust down. Or you could have an extended loan where it's not just 10 years or something, but it might be longer. And that's often for students who have several tens of thousands of dollars of debt. Most student loans have a grace period, about 6 months, where you don't have to pay after you graduate, and then it kicks in. But that's definitely worth checking if you have a grace period and how long it is. Who is your loan servicer? Who actually is that? What's the company that holds that loan? And keep in mind, they can sell your loan to other companies, and they don't need your permission. So they should notify you if it happens. But if you might have missed that, it's always good to double check who is it exactly that's servicing your loan. Then there's loan consolidation or refinancing. Consolidations where you maybe you have multiple loans and you ball them all into one because you want a lower interest rate. Or same with refinancing, similar. You pay off one loan with another loan, usually because there's a preferable interest rate. Loan forgiveness programs exist, for example, for teachers or public service workers. But it's very important to look at your situation and find out what kinds of loan forgiveness program might work for you. So the mistake is simply ignoring the loan and letting it just be totally back burner. You don't have to be some financial expert, but just by knowing these terms and how they apply to your loan in particular, you'll be able to make hopefully some strategic and smart decisions for your situation. And it's also worth noting that student loans are one of the only kind of debt that are not expungible by bankruptcy. So you want to pay attention to these loans and make sure that you are paying them down as fast as possible. All right, mistake number 2, accumulating credit card debt. This can be just the absolute death knell to your financial life. I would honestly recommend just avoid credit cards entirely. They're a little too risky. It's too easy to go spend. And they're not like a smart loan that you get to buy a house, or even a student loan can be a very smart loan to get, where you have a decent interest rate, and it's for something that's an asset. Your education is an asset, and an investment in yourself. A house is an asset that typically appreciates. But credit cards are loans that have horrible interest rates, usually just for consumer goods. In 2024, the average credit card interest rate was 20 to 25% APR, or basically annually. So if you go out on a shopping spree and you buy something, and you're making minimum payments or just above that, it might take you a whole year to pay off that outfit you bought or that sushi dinner. So if you're using a credit card and you're just making payments, you might consider when you're buying things that you add like in your head 25% to the purchase price. And if that suddenly makes it too expensive, then you shouldn't be borrowing which is what a credit card is, to purchase that. So again, I would just recommend avoiding credit cards. There are tons of stories how they've ruined people's lives. However, some people argue that they're helpful because there's perks like air miles or things like that, or you can build your credit score with them. And so if you really, really want to have a credit card and you plan to use it to build your credit, then what I would do is you don't carry it around with you, when you're shopping or just out. You take your debit card instead. It's linked to your checking account. But what you do with your credit card is you find a few recurring payments that you already budgeted for, maybe your Netflix account or your gym membership, and you have it automated come off of your credit card. And then you have your checking account set to automatically pay it off every month. So never, ever, ever carry a balance on a credit card. The interest rates are just unjustifiable. And if you do choose to use your credit card for some of your recurring payments, note that some kinds of payments will add a fee for using a credit card. Like sometimes rent, if they'll even accept it on a credit card, there'll be a big fee because they're trying to discourage people from doing that. But other things, if you have your Prime membership on Amazon or something like that, you could just have it set and then your checking pays it off. That allows you to build credit, at least a little bit of credit, if you absolutely want to have a credit card. But again, generally speaking, unless you have really strong financial habits, they're almost just too risky to play with. And mistake number 3, this is the third of the kind of big 3 that are, in my mind, things that I see, early graduates right out of college not thinking about. But this one is true for every age, and that's simply living beyond your means, right? So spend less than you earn, and that is true at every lifestyle, at every income level. It's very easy for lifestyle creep to sneak in. You get a raise at work, you make a few $1,000s a year more, and you don't even know where that went because suddenly you're just, going out to eat a little more, giving slightly better hotels on your vacations. And it's super easy to burn up a few $1,000s a year more. And the ultimate, if there's one main principle in, healthy financial habits, it's that you cannot spend more than you earn. You're going in the red, you're building debt, and then you have to pay interest on the debt. What you want to be doing is the opposite. You spend slightly below your means and you put it into some kind of investment. And then the interest, rather than working against you on a loan, is working for you in compounding interest, which is something we can get into. But it might be slightly out of the scope of this talk. But one of the biggest tips for living, within your means is to budget, but budget using percentages. And then kind of a pro tip is then use automation and sell accounts. You can open more than one checking or savings. You can have them earmarked for different purposes. You can have different bills moving in and out of them, different paychecks moving in and out of them. You can have them automatically transfer money from one account to another. So you can set up your own system for automating this. But here's some recommended percentages and categories to think about. Really, there's 3. There's essentials, there's savings, and there's discretionary spending. Now, essentials tends to be the biggest category. And I break essentials into 2 forms. There's the fixed ones, like the recurring monthly or bi-monthly payments, and the unfixed, the ones that you just pay for on the go. So 40 to 60% of your money will probably go to fixed essential expenses, right? So that's your rent or housing, insurance that you pay every month, utility payments, your phone, your internet, water, electricity, what have you. I would put a loan payment here. Now, some might argue that you could put your loan payment into the savings category because if it was like a loan for school, you're investing in yourself. But if you can fit it in the fixed essentials, I'd put it there. You could add any payment beyond the minimum to it as part of your investing or savings. Then there's the unfixed essentials: groceries, transportation, healthcare. These are the needs, not the wants, but they're also the ones that you have to go out and buy as needed, and they're not on a fixed cycle. So it's harder to automate those. Savings is the next category. And again, I break this into 2 parts. There's a short-term savings and a long-term savings. Long-term savings also would be, AKA investments. And about 10% should go to both the short-term and 10% to the long-term savings. So your short-term starts as your emergency fund. It could be a few $100, it could be $1,000. Over time, different financial gurus recommend, 3 months of living expenses, 6 months of living expenses, but that can be really hard to pull off, especially for people just starting out, but always having something, right? You don't want to make it such that one, accidental fender bender or illness can really mess up your financial life, and suddenly you're living on a credit card to make ends meet at 20-25%, and you find yourself getting in a really bad situation. So having a little bit of a padding there is incredibly important. And then, of course, short-term savings are your larger purchases. Do you know you're going to need a new computer soon? Do you know you're going to need a new set of tires or a bigger piece of car maintenance, maybe a vacation you're planning for? You want to save for those in advance and then pay them cash rather than be tempted to put them on credit. And then savings long term. A lot of students don't think about this, especially earlier in their careers. They think, oh, I have tons of time. And you do have tons of time, hopefully, right? Hopefully you live and work for a long time, but you have one of your biggest assets for compounding interest is also the time you have. And so if you let a decade of it go away before you decide it's time to start investing, you've missed several years of compounding interest, right? And the stock market on average, take the S&P 500, the top 500 biggest companies in America, there's years they're down, but most years they're up. And over the last century, if you put an investment in just some mutual fund pegged to the S&P 500, your money doubles about every 7 or 8 years. So, over 3 decades or 2 to 21 years, say, your money would double 3 times. And so you can think of the power of compounding, how it's a bell curve that starts to shoot up way at the end, but you need that slow amount of time in the beginning. So even if it's not much, you're putting in a little bit when you're first starting out, A, because you have compounding interest time on your hand, and B, because it's just part of that practice of living below your means and having a percentage go into an investment. Now that investment, could be savings for, high yield savings account that's going to be for a house down payment. It could be for retirement. There's different kinds of investments you can make, and I'm happy to field questions if you're interested in those things. But thinking just in terms of a percentage of your income going to long-term savings. Then there's the discretionary spending. That's the spending where if you've budgeted these other categories, then it's sort of the guilt-free spending, right? You did a good job. You invested in yourself. You've saved for the future, for the unknown emergencies. You've paid all your essential needs and expenses. So now, what's that portion of your income left that you can go out and just really enjoy the fact that you earned this, whether it's entertainment, eating out, hobbies, gifts for people, whatever that might look like. And so here's just a kind of visual. And I know that the images are a little small probably to read all the text, but it's mainly just to teach the point that if you think of your income in these 3 categories, so we have like the essentials, the savings and investing, and then the discretionary spending. And of course, essentials are break into fixed and unfixed, savings into short-term and long-term, or savings and investing, and then your discretionary, the free money, the guilt-free spending. These are just different ways that you might create a target, pie chart based on your phase of life, because it might change over time. So in the middle kind of column here, there's a student ratio. So it's like half is on essentials and breaking it into a quarter into discretionary and savings. But then you're a new graduate, and assuming maybe you were living in the dorms, your parents were helping more, your essentials might go up, and so you have to make for a few years trim one of the other categories. Or this is one where you have a family, right? So this is the highest essentials of all of them, because suddenly, if you have kids, you've got probably some pretty steep childcare payments that you have to work on for a while. Maybe your kid's in college and you're helping pay for that. This over down here is the minimalist lifestyle. Maybe you've heard of the FIRE community, the Financial Independence Retire Early crew. And they like to, try to minimize the essentials, and really maximize savings and investing, because their goal is to, you eat ramen for years, but then you retire early. Different approaches, right? Here's a debt repayment focus one, or a high income earner one. But whatever your situation, these exact percentages might change but these are the basic categories that any budget would have. And so my biggest tip is, live below your means, which means at least some percentage. Even 5% in short term and 5% in long term is better than, spending every single thing you have paycheck to paycheck. But try to come up with a way to have a pie chart that works for you for your season of life, and then make some kind of budget. I hate budgeting. I don't like to track everything, so I tend to automate as much as I can. So if you use a debit card, every single time you swipe it, you see all of the money. Or you maybe use a cash envelope method. It's less popular now. Cash is not as common, but you put, you get your paycheck, you pull out a certain amount of cash, you put it in envelopes, and you spend it out of that. It can be a helpful way for the unfixed essentials. That's usually where it's easier to automate some of these other categories, the savings and fixed essentials. But when you have to, buy different amounts of groceries or gas each month, coming up with ways to creatively sort of like automate or set aside money, it can make it a lot easier so that you're not staring at a spreadsheet all the time, because that's unsustainable for most people to sort of live like that. Now, here's just real quickly the last few tips, right? So this is mistakes 4 through 10, and I'll go through these really fast. But basically, in summary, they're just ways that people fail to plan or fail to build good habits. So one, not having an emergency fund. I mentioned that briefly. Life does throw curveballs. You want to have some padding. Neglecting health insurance. One medical emergency can wipe out thousands and thousands of dollars of savings. And so it doesn't have to be the premium coverage, but some kind of medical insurance is always very important to have. Overlooking employer benefits. A lot of college students have college jobs, and then they get their first career job, and they're not used to talking about or looking into like, oh, I have healthcare, employer provided healthcare, or a retirement plan, or a 501k. If they have a 501k, there's often a company match. They'll match the contribution you make to your own retirement up to 3%, 4%, 5%, depending on the company. It's insane not to take that. It's free money you're leaving on the table. But they also have, maybe paid time off, or there's a variety of different kinds of employer benefits, and those are always worth really researching and looking into early in the career. So that way it's not so mystifying, especially as you get later in a career and might have more of these employer benefits offered to you. Mistake 7 is just impulse buying. It's very easy in a materialistic culture that it's the whole kind of mission of a capitalist system is to grow your sense of what needs and wants into this huge just lifestyle of feeling entitled, or like we deserve every luxury, right? We deserve the nicest hotels, and we deserve the nicest meals and clothes, and that's just the marketing machine in America that's sort of doing its job. And unfortunately, it can make life really, really tough for people. And especially because we not only is it a consumer culture, materialistic culture, but it's a debt culture. We've sort of normalized using credit cards, normalized taking out big loans for auto loans and housing loans, mortgages. And there is nothing more just kind of crushing and sad to see people who have gotten themselves in a really stuck place where so much of their money is just going to servicing debt. And on the outside, they might look like they're wealthy. They might have a shiny car and a decent house, but it's because they're leveraging rather than investing. And that only lasts for so long. It gets more and more stressful all the time. So number 8 mistake is delaying savings and investing. As I mentioned, compound interest is your friend, and the biggest asset you have right out of college is your youth. You have a long time horizon. So even if it's a tiny amount, automate it. Start with $50, 20, $25, whatever you can do, automate it into an investment account. And then as your income grows, that number will grow, because whatever percentage your investments is in your pie chart, it'll get bigger as you grow your career. But then if you get laid off or you have a setback, maybe you pause it for a couple of months, but you get right back to it, even if it's at a tiny amount. And you just kind of think of it as just an essential part of life. And people become quite comfortable in retirement, even off of teachers' salaries and nurses' salaries. You don't have to have some Wall Street job to have a comfortable retirement. It's all about using living below your means and some basic saving and investing. Number 9 is not prioritizing income growth. So it is good to seek raises, and to ask for them, to ask for promotions, to look for job changes every few years, whether that's inside the company into a different role, or to a different company that has a better opportunity for you. And I think a part of this that I would also say, especially, I'm a sociology professor. A lot of my students pick sociology because they have a heart for change and social justice. And the thing I would say is be careful that that you don't mistake your passions for like the primary way that you plan to, sustain yourself financially. So you can develop passions on the job in a variety of jobs. But say your passion is music. And yes, we know some people make it big in music, right? But a lot of folks will pursue something as their career. It won't sustain them. They get burned out. It ends up ruining their passion. Or maybe someone wants to go into nonprofit work. Well, that's fine. You can, but you also could build an income if you like the, day job you pick, and then volunteer and donate to the same kinds of nonprofits that you might have worked for half of the amount. There is a tension here, because I don't want to tell people just follow the money. That doesn't always lead to the most satisfying outcomes, but it is really stressful if you pick a path that's pure passion project that can't sustain your family or some kind of healthy lifestyle. And then number 10, I could have put this number 1 because I see people do it at all stages of life, and that's being house or car poor. Especially you go into the car lot and they want to put you into a car loan, and several thousand more for the car is only, not that many more dollars a month. And so it's really easy for them to have all these add-ins and just kind of talk you up on this car payment. But a car is a depreciating asset. Buy as cheap a car as you that's still safe and will get you to point A and B as you can. Later in your life, if you have a pretty high income and you have a percentage amount that makes sense, then fine, buy that nicer car. But ideally try to pay your cars cash, or at least the vast bulk of it in cash, not just minimum down payment and leveraging the rest. And then houses fall in that category too. We often think of houses as this amazing investment, and they often are an investment. Usually they're an appreciating asset, but they come with tons of hidden expenses: the maintenance, the upkeep, the property taxes, often an HOA payment, depending on the neighborhood you're in. And if you get into a house that is too much house for you, it can make your life really stressful by limiting the ability for you to handle unexpected emergencies, but also to invest in other assets. You don't want all of your investment just to be your home. That's not diversifying for risk. And so, get that little starter home and then move up from there if you need to. But and that could also be a part of like your rent if you're renting something that's just way too expensive. And I know it's a tricky thing to say living in San Diego, right? This is one of the most expensive housing markets. But housing expenses and car payments usually are the biggest fixed expenses in somebody's pie chart. And so any strategic way to keep those lower, even if it's some sacrifice now for opportunity later, that's very wise to try and think about going minimalist, especially when you're starting out. Okay. What questions do you have? I'm happy to move back through any slide or any of the things I touched on.
I have a question. Okay, I'm going to try and get it out the way I want it to be. But so my question is, for student loans. Is it better to take out a student loan and with the money you have, like in that moment, put it into an investment account and then hope that you can maybe get loan forgiveness later on, depending on like if that's a possibility in your career? Is it smarter to do that, or is it smarter just to pay off the loans if you have the money instead of putting it into investment?
That's an excellent question. And there's not one answer for that, right? So I'll give you a horror story. When I was in college, interest rates were really low, lower than they are now. And real estate was doing really well. And so I was like, oh, I don't even need these student loans. I'd actually gotten some scholarships and was working on the side, and tuition was not as high as it is now. It's, outpaced inflation for years. So I made the strategic decision that you're talking about, where I maxed out my student loans at these low interest rates and bought a house with them, down payment. And then, well, this happened in 2008, 2007 to 8. If you know your history, that was when the housing bubble burst. And so I ended up being upside down on a mortgage, had to get a government short sale to get out from under it, had no house. But guess what? I still had those student loans that I did not need that I took out to invest. Now, that's a worst case scenario, right? I mean, it was a historic housing bubble burst. Ultimately, that comes down to two things. One is just the math, the percentages, right? So if you're going to, if you're taking out this loan and you put it into an investment, if the loan is like 6% and you're putting it into an S&P 500 index fund that is, maybe going to grow at 8% or something, okay, maybe that's a little better. But the challenge is, the rates could go up or down. You don't know for sure. There's capital gains tax. So if you pull that money out, that extra 2%, if in our example, it's 6% of the loan interest versus 8% of the S&P 500, if you pay capital gains of 15%, which is what it is, that'll probably eat up most of that 2% anyway. It comes out being almost a wash in most cases. If you find some opportunity where the math is way better than the loan, it could make mathematical sense. But then there's that second point, and that is human psychology. Are you actually going to be able to keep that money and invest it, or will you spend it? The only reason I would say take out a little more loan than maybe you think you immediately need is if your essential living costs would tempt you to live off credit cards, because those are 20-25%. So your student loan is better than living on a credit card, but it's probably not better than like buying stocks. They definitely don't buy individual stocks. That's way too much risk. So generally speaking, I'd say give back every dollar you don't absolutely think you need. But if you need to have a little cushion to keep you off credit card living, then that's the main advice I'd give to that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great question, though. Hey, Alexa, sure.
If you're in the event where you get some sort of raise, are you supposed to spread that money out over spread it out over the risks you have, or are you supposed to use all that money to prioritize your student loans or any other loans you've taken out in order to, if that makes any sense?
So, okay, so you're saying you have student loans, but then you also get a raise at work. And now you want to know, do you take that whole raise and pay back your student loan quicker, or do you do other things like build an emergency fund, invest in retirement, things like, is that the question? Yeah, so there's two kind of thoughts on this. There's the debt snowball approach, where maybe you've heard of Dave Ramsey, sort of the guru on this approach. And his whole thing is you live as cheaply as you can and you pay your debt first, and you try to become debt free and live debt free. And you simply attack your highest interest debt in order. And so it's like, or if you have some small debt, you pay that off to get a psychological win. But then it's like any credit card debt, boom, pay that off first. Then if it's student loans, you pay that off. Then if it's the mortgage, you pay that off. There's some advantage in that, especially for people that have a life experience of getting underwater in debt and just struggling with credit cards and things like that. Then you really just every dollar goes to, and even then he would still say have a tiny emergency fund, because if you don't have any emergency, you get an unexpected layoff or sickness, or your tires pop in your car, like it can be devastating. That is almost like an important insurance policy itself, as a tiny, I don't think you need 6 months of every living expense. Later in life, maybe. But I would say $1,000, So if you get a raise at work and you don't have any emergency fund, that's the absolute first thing. Start with your first 1,000, then add 1,000, then add a couple more thousand, but just a little bit of a cushion for emergencies. And then I do think it's helpful to start investing in the long term, even while paying off student debt, primarily because there's some learning you'll get by doing it. You'll have to research which investment you want to use. I could give recommendations. I'm absolutely not a financial planner, but the recommendations are just the lowest management fees on a very simple like index S&P 500 fund, or a target year retirement mutual fund. That very low fees. That's the other key. But even if you're only you get a raise that's say $200 a month, put like 50 of it into that retirement and the other 150 to your student loan or something like that. Now, you did mention the possibility of, I think you said the loan forgiveness, because maybe you're a teacher or a civil servant of some kind. And that would be, or maybe that was part of Cassie's question, but that is one thing to think about. In that case, then maybe you do invest a little more with your raise into like your retirement or down payment for a house, as long as you're making the required payment on your student loan. Because if there's a really high chance it'll get forgiven, then why not take advantage of that? But it's also, you can't, even if you think it's a field where it'll be forgiven, it often depends on what the current administration in the White House is up to and the policies. They can kind of change and make it harder to get forgiven, even if you in the beginning were told that you would qualify. So you don't want to 100% assume that especially government loan forgiveness will always come through. That's an unfortunate reality. I wish that weren't true. But there's many people who have found that for whatever reason, their loan didn't qualify because they consolidated it, and then the company they consolidated with caused them to be excluded from that program, or they were working at a private rather than a public school, and that didn't count. Or there can be these loopholes. But thank you for the question. And if there's any follow-ups on anything, feel free to chime in, or if I say something you don't know what I'm talking about.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, Neil.
So I remember earlier you mentioned 501k as opposed to a 401k, which I've heard of. And in both instances, they do like price matching for contributions in investments, correct?
Let me look up 501k. Did I say 501k?
Yeah, I think you did, but I could be wrong. But I was just wondering like what the primary differences between the two are.
Okay. If I said 501k, I meant 401k. I think there is something called that. It's not a common retirement. Yeah, even in a quick Google search, I'm not seeing. Well, there may be something I would have to do a little bit of homework on it. The main difference in retirement plans is an IRA versus the 401k. And so, I mean, the IRA, the independent retirement account, it's independent because you take it out yourself. And so whether you work for a company or not, you can keep investing in it, even if you switch companies or whatever. Whereas your 401k it's offered by your employer. The advantage of the 401k is they often have that employee match. Not in every case, but that can be really, really helpful. If you have an IRA, then it's usually the choice between the Roth IRA or the standard IRA. And all that has to do with so the key thing about the IRA is it's tax deferrable, right? So there's a tax advantage to investing in your retirement. The government is incentivizing you to invest in your retirement. And so with an IRA, the traditional one, you get a paycheck and you put some money from that paycheck, usually automated, into your IRA. Then you don't have to pay income tax on the money when it goes into the IRA. So if you're making $50,000 a year and you're putting, a few thousand a year into this IRA, your taxable income drops by the amount you've given. So it's almost like you donated it to charity, but the charity is old you. And so it's tax sheltered. The Roth IRA, though, you still get a tax benefit, but the timing is reversed. So you pay your income tax and then you donate to it. But later, after it's had years to accumulate, and you draw out of it, you don't have to pay income tax on it then. I should say that with the traditional IRA, you don't pay tax for it to go in, but later when you pull out, that's when you pay the income tax. So you're paying higher income tax later because the money's grown, right? But you were able to put more money in early because you didn't pay the income tax now. So what's the advantage of the Roth versus non-Roth? It's really just how long do you think it'll be until you're pulling from it, and how high do you think your income will be then, because your tax brackets could change. So if you're young and you anticipate having a high income later in life, the Roth IRA is better. So that way it's not taxable at your higher interest rate later in life. But that's almost more like intermediate financial planning than basic financial planning. Simply having a retirement fund is the first step. And then maybe as you have different jobs, compare it with the 401ks they have. And there are different vehicles out there, but those are probably the most common terms. There's just IRA and 401k.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I can always edit the video too if it's too long. So if there's anything back here that's just helpful for you guys for me to talk about, any terms or things, I'm happy to. Otherwise, yeah, thank you for your questions.
I was going to ask one more thing. So obviously, like paying off your loans or paying like the standard amount each month is important. Would you say like the next goal would be with your money is to invest? Like would be like a next goal, like you get a job out of college, you're paying off your loans like you're supposed to. Would that next goal be to like hopefully buy a house and then on and on and on? Like what's the best kind of way to like handle your money when you're young?
Yeah, best is tricky, right? There's no best. It's all situation dependent. Markets change. Same with buying a house. Like there was a time when it was like buying the house was the like, you know, still sometimes is associated with like the American dream, right? And most like boomers who have some money now got that through their family home. So if you talk to your grandparents and they bought their home and oh, I bought it for $50,000 and now it's $1 million. You know? But the reality is housing costs have exploded, especially in certain markets like the one we live in currently. It can make buying that home really difficult to happen. And especially if you've had a certain kind of lifestyle, the kind of neighborhood you might need to be in for it to be responsible, you know, people sometimes don't want to. So then they end up scraping just barely enough together to get that, you know, down payment, or even worse, rather than the standard down payment of 20%, they do a 10% down payment. And it's already a mortgage they can barely afford. They're setting themselves up to foreclose on that house someday. Especially if they don't have emergency funds built up, and they're, you know, and then if they can't afford to invest in their retirement because of the house, but they're like, the house is the investment, right? Like, and then they want to, because once you own a home, then you want to remodel the home and you want to upgrade the home, and you're responsible for property taxes and all these things. Buying a home is not the same like financial panacea as it often is attributed, because the market dynamics of home ownership have changed. Now, it can be good to get into a home, but, well, for one, right now, interest rates are higher. So, you know, your home payments will be higher. And I lost my thought about what I was about to say right then. I mean, ultimately, though, it boils down to, it can be helpful. It can be wise to rent. So don't ever feel like you're financially failing because you're a renter. If you're putting your money into thoughtful investments, that can be strategic as well. I mean, I think I was going to say something about diversification. It's always helpful for your investments to be somewhat diversified. So like buying in the S&P 500 is already diversified to a degree because you're buying into 500 companies with every share you buy, rather than just buying an Apple stock, right? Or a Tesla stock. Both of those are in the S&P 500. So you buy one share of an S&P 500, you've already bought a little bit of Apple and Tesla, plus 498 other companies. You can diversify a little more by adding different kinds of, you know, mutual funds, or often now you might end up getting what's called an ETF. Sort of, it's very similar to a mutual fund. But if all your money is in your house, that's not diversified. You have some natural disaster happens to your house, or you happen to be in a neighborhood that home values plummet, or you buy too much house than you can afford and you lose it, then you've not been investing anywhere else. And you lose everything. You start back over, or you at least have a really big setback. So when I look at housing prices and the job market for new graduates right now, I do feel for them a bit, because I think getting into that home will be harder than it has been for some generations. You know, some folks will land really high paying jobs or have, family support. But for the rest, it's the simple of like, get your pie chart, make sure you're putting percentages into long-term investments. It doesn't have to be the home, though. Oh, I remember the thing I forgot what I was talking about. It was the reason the 10% down payment is worse than the 20% down payment is not just because it's smaller. It's that you pay an extra, what's called P&I insurance, an extra like insurance payment if your equity is not at least 20%. And so people will get into these home loans, or oh my God, some will get like a fixed rate. So it's like, or a variable rate. So it's like after 5 or 10 years, the rate will go up. Like it's super optimistic thinking, but it's not really risk thoughtful, because things happen in life. Not everything goes up and to the right. And so if you buy a house, great. But, and you also want to live in it 5 or 10, probably like 10 years before you sell it, because you pay not only the realtor fees and closing costs, but potentially there's capital gains. If the house has gone up in value, well, you'll lose 15% off of that. And there are tax loopholes, 531 exchange. Again, I don't want to get too deep, but make the dream to have a lifestyle where 10% or something is going into a long-term investment, and feel as good about that as this like pride of home ownership thing. And if home ownership happens, great. But, my current wife and I both bought little starter kind of homes in the past. And when we got married, instead of buying a new home that was a little bigger for our merged family, we decided we're just going to keep our smaller ones as rentals, and then we'll also rent, because a lot of these same principles, like we don't want to pull every asset we have to buy this bigger San Diego priced home. And, we're not sure where we'd want to live for 5 to 10 years. And then that doesn't make sense. So I know I'm going on this a little longer than I should, but it's because it's kind of this personal topic to me, the home ownership thing. Just don't let home ownership be this like measurement of feeling like you've been successful in life, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.